Welcome to India's World, where we look at the current developments across the world and gauge its impact on India. Today, we aren't going too far, just stepping outside our borders into Nepal. Nepali Congress President Sher Deuba has been elected as the 40th Prime Minister of the country, a post that he has held 3 times before. The ascendancy, of course, was a gradual one as the outgoing Prime Minister Prachanda stepped down in line with his party's arrangement with the Nepali Congress. Now, it is hoped that the new government will show similar statesmanship and amend the country's constitution to fulfill the aspirations of the Madhesis. Similarly, New Delhi also hopes that Deuba will maintain the momentum in India-Nepal ties, which Prachanda resumed as Prime Minister. Now, to discuss the expectations and perhaps the challenges that both countries may face, we have in studio today Shankar Mukerjee is a former ambassador to Nepal. We have SD Muni, foreign affairs expert, especially on Nepal, and also Dr. Haribans is the executive director of the Center for Economic and Technical Studies located in Nepal. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining me here on the show. Ambassador Mukerjee, if I could start with you. Deuba, of course, being from the Nepali Congress, traditionally it's a party that's been close with India. They've had friendly ties. How do you see this bilateral relationship developing?
Well, if you look back on the days when KPS Oli, the leader of the CP and UML, was the Prime Minister, relations went through a very bad patch, including the uprising in the Terai with the Madheshi issues leading to the blockade on the border, for which the Oli government and various others blamed India and so on. We had Prachanda as the next Prime Minister, who brought things back to a somewhat more even keel. And another good thing is that he's at least kept to his commitment to hand over power which was a gentleman's agreement between the two parties, to Sher Deuba. Deuba is a very known entity, as you said in your introduction. This is the 4th time he's become Prime Minister. Twice, in fact, he has the distinction of having been sacked by the erstwhile king. So the problems are not so much as I don't see a dramatic change in Indo-Nepal relations as they stand today. One hopes there'll be a steady improvement in developmental work, in the political interaction and so on. The challenges Prime Minister Deuba is going to face are internal.
Yes.
And I think he's identified, according to the reports I saw, 5 priorities as Prime Minister, and that does in fact touch upon the 5 major challenges he faces. It depends on how far he'll be able to deal with them. He's talking about the constitutional amendments, and before that, of course, his commitment to holding the local, the provincial, as well as the final parliamentary elections by the due date of 2018.
Yes.
He's talked about pushing through the constitutional amendments, which have stonewalled things so far in terms of implementation of the constitution and the peace process. And he's talked of the much needed relief that is still not happening to the victims of the earthquake that hit Nepal. So these are his internal challenges.
Yes.
For me and for others in India, I think the political issue is the Madheshi issue, because that does impinge on India.
Yes.
And
talking about the Madhesi issue, Dr. Jha, if I could come to you, the political parties, at least for the past few months now, they seem to have given up their demand, or at least as far as the reports coming into India are concerned, that it doesn't seem to be as hotly debated as it was perhaps a year back. As far as the constitutional amendment goes, why the sudden change of position? Are they expecting some kind of magic wand from Deuba?
It is not exactly like that. I have a perception that they are developing in a progressive way. So when, of course, there was this economic blockade, there was much talk about these Madhesis issues, but then now comparatively it has subsided now. But then the struggle continues there.
Okay.
So I have a perception that certain elements who are opportunistic actually, they chose to surrender the elements that promulgated the earlier constitution. But by and large, I think that the Madhesis, they have the same line of struggling against the constitution actually, as they had at that time.
Okay.
So I have a perception that this struggle for removing certain anomalies in the constitution, that will continue in future as well.
Okay. And speaking about Deuba, we can't help but reflect on how Prachanda has left things, Dr. Muni. There's a general perception, of course, we all know left parties, the communists, of course, closer to China. But, Prachanda was someone who tried to balance things with India as well and was in fact accused by Beijing for trying to be too close to India. How do you think Deuba is going to manage that?
Well, that's precisely the issue I wanted to link up with your basic question as to how Indo-Nepal relations would grow under Deuba. Would much depend upon, I think, two parameters or two scales. One is scale what Ambassador Mukerjee said as to how he performs domestically on three critical issues: carrying forward the constitution, which means holding the remaining part of the elections, accommodating the Madhesh or the marginalized groups, which means another constitution amendment which has already been moved in the parliament, whether he is able to carry it forward or not. Incidentally, he got 388 votes and all he needs to carry out any constitutional change is 9 more votes. And don't forget, there were large number of absentees. So it much depends upon the sincerity of this coalition, which can make hard efforts to get the constitution amendment carried forward. And third is development, where assistance from India and cooperation from India would be critical. The second parameter which you have touched is very, very vital as to how he manages the external relations between India and China. And here it is not a question of, anything being done vis-a-vis China is anti-India or anything done vis-a-vis India is anti-China. That's not the issue any longer.
Right. India has reflected that as well.
Not only that, it is no longer.
Nepal's relations with China doesn't mean that, things
no,
with us are
because this time the Chinese are pushing themselves into South Asia and into Nepal. Therefore, Nepal and India together will have to deal with this Chinese push. And it remains, it's a very complicated and a serious foreign policy issue for the Nepali leaders, how they manages or balances this situation without antagonizing or without displeasing beyond a limit either of its neighbors. And if he fails on foreign policy on China front or on India front, India-Nepal relations can get seriously disturbed. If he fails on any of the domestic parameters, again it can create situations which will impact on India-Nepal relations.
All right. We continue this discussion after a very quick break. We'll be back on India's World in a bit. Stay with us. Welcome back to India's World. Ambassador Mukerjee, during Prachanda's term, several official and ministerial level engagements took place between India and Nepal. The presidents also, they paid reciprocal visits. There were in fact a lot of them. Prachanda himself came twice. Was this a good sign? And is this a good sign for, in fact, South Asian nations? Something like a Europe, how the countries meet very regularly and, it somehow strengthens the bond. Is this a sign, a need, in fact, at the moment?
Well, in diplomacy, in international relations, high-level ministerial visits, or even at higher levels, the exchange of heads of state and so on, it's always a good thing. I mean, these are expressions of political will, of the political push behind what's going on the ground in terms of relationship in every sector, political, commercial and economic, which is so big, even if it's not headline grabbing all the time. So the sheer number of visits that have been exchanged between India and Nepal actually underlines what is known but not talked about all the time, is that we have a very multifaceted relationship covering just about every aspect of human endeavor. You quoted Europe's example. Now there they've taken it further. The constant interaction is actually institutionalized at the level of heads of government in the European Council. We have not done that. So in the absence of that, the fact is that there has been recently and even before, but during the previous Prime Minister's time, a very, very large number of such visits at every level, technical, political and so on. And that is a thing that should continue because that is essential for, the relationship can become very, very sensitive, as everybody knows. And it is at that level that you can build trust, you can build confidence, you can remove misunderstandings. So, I mean, my answer to that, of course, is an unqualified affirmative.
Yes. Okay.
And one hopes that it will continue under Prime Minister Deuba's stewardship. But as I said, the challenge is going to be whether these frequent interactions will result in both sides having the satisfaction of solving the problems that face Nepal and Indo-Nepal relations, or whether each one of them is going to be, troubleshooting to get rid of newer crises.
Yes.
We'll just have to see. I think what we're looking at is, from both sides, very enlightened, mature diplomacy.
Okay. Okay. Dr. Muni, you've reflected upon how during KP Oli's time, and Ambassador as well has said that the things were of course not as India would have liked it, or for that even Nepal would have liked it at that moment between India and Nepal. Prachanda of course balanced it, and you've touched upon how the Indo-China equation is something that it will be a challenge for Deuba and consecutively for other governments as well, as far as Nepal is concerned. Personality-wise, political will-wise, how do you see Deuba managing that?
Well, I would say, look, I mean, I normally tend not to emphasize too much on personalities, because I always feel that human beings are, all said and done, the creatures of their own times. And as somebody,
as in he's been a player, of course, in Nepal
everybody
politics
is
for a while.
yeah, I know
Yes.
everybody is a player. In fact, all said and done, even Mr. Oli realized that the extent to which he had gone was not prudent, and therefore he had to take steps back. To that extent, New Delhi realized that the extent to which they had gone in relations with Nepal was not prudent, and they had to take steps back under the same leadership. So the leadership has to adjust with the contingencies of the context and the situation in which they are operating. And this is where I am saying that Prachanda was a continuation of the realization which Oli had, which had dawned on Oli, but Oli was not fully responding to that. This is what I would say. And Prachanda, he did not spoil relations with China. He went to China himself. He has accepted OBOR, which may not, many people in New Delhi may not be happy with, and he has also signed some very critical developmental agreements with the Chinese side.
Yes.
Same would, I think, dawn or would impact on Deuba, that while maintaining and building a very creative, constructive relationship with India, which I think is the backbone of development in Nepal, whether it's unfortunate that I am Indian and I am saying so, but that's a reality of India-Nepal relations. But while doing that, in no way, if he neglects the Chinese or create conditions or situations where which are not palatable to the Chinese, Nepal can run into serious problems, because China is a major power and is almost aggressively pushing itself into South Asia and into Nepal, and they made no secret of it. They repeatedly say that Nepal is a very vital area. Therefore, balancing the two sides is a actual tightrope walking for Deuba and Nepal, anybody in Nepal. And I think they'll have to do it very, very carefully.
Okay. Dr. Jha, talking about the internal challenges, Ambassador of course pointed out what really are the challenges that, at least at the moment, at the face of it, that seem to be for Deuba. And of course the challenges have changed ever since he's been the Prime Minister before, and now the spillover obviously is something that India witnesses as well, especially when it comes to the Madhesi movement. What, according to you, are the challenges that he faces at the moment, and how is he going to help in getting those communities together?
I think it is quite clear that the most important challenge, and he himself, Deuba himself accepted this fact, is the reality that he has to complete the half-done elections, local elections in the country. So his predecessor, he completed elections in the hills, but more challenging is conducting elections in the Tara, in the Madhes region. So it is a greater challenge before Deuba. Now, but I am doubtful if he will be able to handle these elections to the extent it is expected from him.
Okay.
Because even in the past he didn't appear to be that competent in resolving the Nepali politics actually during 3 times of his tenure in the past in Nepal. So we are very much doubtful if he will be able to conduct the elections that successfully, and that too in bringing all the parties, disgruntled parties, dissatisfied groups in the mainstream.
Okay. You would like to make a point, sir?
You know, I was saying it's not only the local elections.
Yes.
The challenge before Deuba is to carry out 2 other elections at the state level and at the parliament level, because otherwise the constitutional implementation is not complete. And the major hurdle lies in the state elections, because the state boundaries are an issue of great dispute. Therefore, constitutional amendment becomes almost absolutely essential before he moves forward.
Yes.
And there again, satisfying and carrying everybody, it is possible that after the local elections they skip the state elections and go straight to the parliamentary election. It is theoretically possible if all the parties agree. Therefore, the internal challenge is much more severe on Mr. Deuba. And I would say that with all respect to Mr. Deuba, he will have to draw the strength and decisiveness of GP Koirala and the resilience of Prachanda.
Okay.
And if he can make a cocktail out of this, which is sympathetic, probably he would find a way, because tremendous resilience has been shown by Mr. Prachanda, and you have to have a very decisive way to carry his own party together, because within the Nepali Congress itself, don't ever forget, there are constituencies which do not want to be accommodative towards the Madhesh issue, who do not want to do many other things which the party's agenda and party's objective would like them to do.
Okay.
Therefore, you have to have, fight battles at various levels.
All right. A quick break here, and we'll talk about the China factors. We'll delve into it deeper. We've, of course, touched upon it, but a bit deeper on India's world. Stay with us. Welcome back to India's World. Dr. Muni, since you were the one who's really highlighting the China problem really that could be between India and Nepal, Nepal, you pointed out, of course, one of the countries that signed OBOR. How is it going to play overall? Is it going to change dimensions to a certain way? Deuba, how is he going to be handling that?
Well, I can't define for Deuba what he would be doing. But in dealing with China, one has to go with a lot of patience and lot of understanding. Number one, the OBOR itself has many internal problems. Creating linkages or connectivity linkages, which is being promised to Nepal to bring the railroad, and is a very expensive proposition. And we have it from the Chinese leaders that OBOR budgeting is still a lot of problems around that. Now, what that would proceed actually remains on the Chinese side and how they deal with it. Nepal would also like such connectivity to take place. But the connectivity cannot be one-sided. You cannot have a train which moves only from north to south. And what I mean is that then will other people of Nepal or India and goods of will they have freedom to go into Tibet? The big question is how far the Chinese are prepared to open up Tibet by linking it with Nepal. Because Nepal is a free country, everybody comes and goes there. Now, are they prepared to give that kind of an access to Nepal or through Nepal is a very, very big question. And I think because their entire emphasis right now is on stopping the Tibetan refugees and blocking this and that. And I think anybody from Nepal, Dr. Jha would bear me out, the traffic is one way. Now, this one-way traffic is not the sign of any connectivity. So, I think Mr. Deuba will have to take care. And secondly, that some of these economic projects which the Chinese are doing in other South Asian neighbors have a very strong strategic undercurrent. And Nepal should not accept any strategic undercurrent which becomes a major security hazard both to Nepal and to India. And that would create a lot of problems for India. Therefore, these two things, while engaging China, the Nepalese will have to keep it in mind. They are apparently politically very excited. Oh, we are going to China. China is an option.
Yes.
But when you're looking for an option, they should not tie themselves up in a dependency relationship, should not allow strategic objectives to be filled there,
Yes.
and be very careful what the Chinese are capable and willing to do.
All right. Ambassador, during the last few years, there's been a bonhomie between, the Nepal army and the PLA that we've been noticing. Do you believe this relationship will alter relations between Indian and Nepal armies? They've had warm relations for decades, so
and they've had extremely close relations to the extent where the chief of the army in either country immediately after taking over is ordained as an army chief in the other
Yes.
country. Plus, if you look at the logistics and all the equipment that the Nepali army uses, it's almost totally, until the Americans also came in recent years with a little bit, entirely Indian. Their officers have been mostly trained in India and so on. So the relationship is very, very strong indeed. But that aspect actually is part of what Professor Muni mentioned. It's China's strategic impulses which have been much more aggressive in recent years worldwide as well as in Nepal. When I was there from 2004 onwards, the Chinese made it very clear right up to that moment that they would work with whoever is in power in Nepal. They were seen as supporters of the king, which they were. Then the political parties took over after the Andolan and democracy was ushered in. They made it very clear openly that they would work with the political parties because the equation had changed. And their priority was, just as you said, Tibet, the Tibetan refugees.
Yes.
And on the second point was that Nepal should always line up, as should the rest of the world, on the one China policy. Since then, things have changed. The Chinese presence in Nepal is not a quiet, strong economic power only. It is in fact much more than that. Nepal has every right as a sovereign country to, and in fact it should maintain good relations with its giant neighbor to the north and its giant neighbor to the south. As far as we are concerned, there are two very clear geopolitical facts. One is that connectivity between Nepal and India is a given. It's seamless. Whereas connectivity between Nepal and China is actually very, very difficult. Geography cannot be denied here,
Yes.
no matter how much money you sink into infrastructure projects. But in fact, the talk of connectivity in Nepal, which is accompanied by anti-Indian rhetoric, is usually a reflection of the good old China card, which has been a hardy sort of a tool of the Nepali regime since King Mahindra's days. But having said that, the strategic underpinning that Professor Muni was talking about is, I think, important for us to reflect upon. And all I would say is, because this has various aspects to it, it reminds me of a briefing I was given by a former foreign secretary when I was going as head of mission to another country. We need not name it. All he said was, listen, we know they are not with us in everything, make sure
Yes.
they're not against us. Which means we have to make sure with Nepal that we have to tell them, and there are various ways of doing it, that of course you must maintain good relations with China. We are not against that. You're a sovereign nation. We're not worried about it. But please ensure that your soil, your country, is not used by the Chinese or by anybody else, that includes Pakistan and its fake currency rackets,
Yes.
for inimical action against India. That is what our diplomacy has to ensure. And the one thing that we haven't yet touched upon,
Yes.
which is, I think, absolutely crucial, regardless of the internal politics and dynamics in Nepal, regardless of the China much more aggressive push in Nepal and in South Asia, is our developmental agenda. I mean, we've only talked about political and security issues and
Yes.
internal dynamics of the quality of Nepal. We have the most ambitious developmental program in Nepal compared to other countries. That must not only continue, it must be expanded regardless of which party is in power in Nepal. That way, I think, that is utterly crucial to our entire diplomatic effort, not just the China factor, not just the Madheshi issue, but overall. So India's diplomatic task is, I think, to very, very strongly intensify our development agenda and development cooperation with Nepal. And on the other hand, to help Nepal in sorting out its internal problem at their request and with their priorities.
Okay. Okay. Dr. Jha, you know, in fact, I was coming to you about these developmental projects, and you know how we are, of course, talking about how India is hoping, how India hopes Deuba may manage, you know, these relations. But, you know, in Nepal, what is the sense that one gets as a change of government comes in, you know, relations vis-a-vis China and India as well? What's the kind of expectations there?
As my both colleagues here, one right and the other in the left, they have mentioned that we the Nepalese, we need to move ahead by balancing our relations both with the south as well as with the north. But there is also a feeling that perhaps we have moved far ahead in terms of developing relations with the north. And it is there that I think India does have anxiety. And even in Nepal, actually, in certain corners, we have an anxiety that that will not be in our own national interest, in Nepal's own national interest. So now it is not that these agendas are only of the government and the political parties in power, but because of the growing level of awareness among the people, there has been thoughts that balancing means we have to see our own interest actually, whether going to the north, there lies our interest, or going more towards south, that is our interest. So we have also to take this factor into consideration, and it is very clear that we have traditional ties with India in cultural, social, economic, and that China is not a match for it. We are very clear on this. So I think that that should be our priority, national priority. And people have begun to understand this reality.
All right, all right. So it's of course a new term. Yes, very quickly, sir.
No, I just want to add to what Dr. Jha has said, because Prachanda made a statement some time back that I have, in my foreign policy, I have maintained a balanced and equal relationship. Now, balance is not equal. Balance is not a synonym of equal. You cannot maintain an equal relationship for Nepal with India on the one hand and China. It will be a balanced relationship, and Nepal will have to find where most of its eggs should be put in.
Yes, yes, absolutely. So like I was saying, it's a new term, new challenges of course this time around for Deuba, and we'll have to wait and see of course how things pan out, especially as far as India and Nepal is concerned. Thank you of course gentlemen for joining me here on India's World. That's it for the moment. Thank you.